Hi everyone. On episode 12 of Masters of the Deal, we're joined by Aaditya Gutgutia, Executive Director of DAM Capital Advisors and author of The Polycycle Investor. Aditya has been at the center of some of India's largest capital market transactions. In this episode, he shares stories from the Coal India IPO, one of the largest fundraisers in India's history. He also talks about advising on the IndiaMART listing, one of the early success stories of India's internet IPO wave. Let's get into it. So, Aditya, thank you for coming to Masters of the Deal. It's great having you here. I just want to introduce you. You've had over 20 years of experience in the investment banking industry. Currently, you're the executive director at DAM Capital, one of the fastest growing investment banks. You've done everything from capital markets to M&A to PE/VC fundraising. So you've seen every part of the industry from the buy side and the sell side. Previously, you held leadership positions in Edelweiss Financial Services, Access Capital, and SBI Capital Markets. So very different investment banks and very different cultures there as well. And your expertise, through IPOs, corporate restructuring, demergers, cross-border M&A, structured debt, and private capital raising shows that you've been in the game for a long time. So welcome to Masters of the Deal. We'll jump into your journey and how you got to where you are. And thank you for making the time.
Thanks for having me, Harsh. Thanks for having me on the show. This is something which is very exciting. I've had the chance to see one or two episodes of yours in the past and really love the way you hold this conversation. And good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon what time of the day your viewers are seeing it. So let's get it rolling.
Super. So tell me a little bit about yourself. I noticed that you're from Delhi. Were you born and brought up in Delhi? Because you studied in Delhi.
No, actually not. I am from a place called Dhanbad in Jharkhand. Right, went to a classical convent school that you see in most parts of the tribal belt of the country, whether it's Jharkhand, Odisha, Bengal, right? So there are a lot of convent schools there. So went to one of those. And then, like you rightly said, for my college, I came here because at that point of time, Jharkhand used to be Bihar. Higher education was not the best quality that one would look for. Had the privilege to, come to one of the larger cities, spend time in Delhi University, and then did my MBA. Incidentally, that also happened in Gurgaon at MDI Gurgaon. Did my chartered accountancy along the way, and then obviously, like you rightly mentioned, 2 decades of doing capital market investment banking predominantly, but a lot of project advisory, a lot of M&As, a lot of private equity trades as well thrown in between.
So in your MBA, I see that you were the first student who managed a live fund for Unnati. How did that come to be? Like,
So I was not the first student. It was the first student managed fund at that point of time. I think we were the third or fourth batch which ran it. So we used to have a gentleman called Mr. Sanjay Bakshi, very very celebrated investor professor in the country, as our professors. So at that point of time, because of him, batch after batch, year after year, a lot of us built a lot of love for value investing, and that is where we thought some of our seniors thought that we should have a live lab kind of a thing where we could invest real money, and that did well for us. So it actually got us thinking. We created a proper fund like structure. We had analysts, we had investment managers, we had an investment committee. So fairly well run, very very good experience, and it actually made students like us, people who are interested in finance, start valuing and evaluating businesses relatively early on. What works, what doesn't work, what are the things which can go wrong. So it was a great start to have, and under the guidance of Professor Bakshi and some of the other finance professors, we it helped us hone our skills relatively early on.
Mhm. And why this interest in finance? Why did you choose to go into this stream?
So this is a very interesting thing, Harsh. I come from a family of chartered accountants. Incidentally, my father chartered accountant. My brother accountant. And incidentally, a very, very interesting anecdote on the family. The first Indian chartered accountant was from my family, Mr. N. Gutgutia, Kashinath Gutgutia. He was my grandfather. He was the first chartered accountant. So kind of runs in the bloodstream in terms of interest in finance. So he went to London to do his chartered accountancy even before the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India was formed. So from that perspective, a family which is born in finance and which is generally interested in finance quite a bit.
And that's a first. I've heard of families who are politicians, and the legacy passes on. But I have seen a pattern in terms of kids following what the fathers do. In this case, did your father also get into finance because of your grandfather?
So generally, something this is something I think which intuitively came to us. So he was my cousin grandfather. So I would not say he got into the business because of my grandfather, but if you wanted to have a career driven by academics, driven by education, finance is something which came across very, very intuitively to all of us. And apart from that, you would also appreciate that in Bihar, the options for higher education at that point of time were relatively limited, and obviously cost is always a factor in those days, 60s, 70s, uh, when my father did his chartered accountancy. So from that perspective, CA was a relatively easy thing to do sitting in Bihar. It did not matter whether you are in Timbuktu or you are in Madras or you are in Delhi when you are doing chartered accountancy, because the paper is same for everyone, and you have to clear your exams, and that is how you become a chartered accountant. So you don't have a decisive disadvantage being in a smaller town while doing something like a chartered accountancy.
And then you worked as a deputy manager for Abhishek Industries for about a year and a half, doing financial planning, resource mobilization, and then took the leap into investment banking with SBI Capital Markets. Um, Help me understand how that happened. Was the goal always to get into investment banking and just gain some experience before you get into it, or was it a very natural opportunity which
So
showed up?
while there was always keenness to get into investment banking, right? But those days, early 2000s, the opportunities in investment banking were few and far in between. It was kind of a cartel of four, five, six big institutions where you would get investment banking jobs, and they were very few and far in between. So while that was always a kind of intent to get into an investment banking kind of a role, but the way it started off was a corporate, which was a placement from campus. And then actually, I went along the flow. Most of my job changes have been changes where people have worked with me and they said that, why don't you come and join us? So one of my colleagues who helped us do a private equity deal, so we raised a private equity round from CVC in those times, recommended me to ENAM. And that is how I came to ENAM and started doing capital market investment banking. Similarly, a friend of mine was leaving SBI Caps and he was asked to look for a replacement for himself. And that is how I went to SBI Caps. So, from that perspective, it has always been a little bit more organic and opportunity driven rather than me going actively and hunting out for something.
How interesting. So it's the relationships that you formed during your career which kind of pulled you up the ladder as you went along, right?
That's right. That's right, Harsh.
And then this leap during COVID time to doing something of your own. Was emerging India Value Advisory? Were you part of the founding team and the idea behind it, or were you
No,
kind
I
of
was
offered
not.
that?
Actually, I was not part of the founding team. Again, it was a similar kind of an exercise, Harsh. A very good friend, Rajiv Mangla, he's been running this for 15, 20 years. And he kind of asked me, I was working in Edelweiss, that why don't you try and do an entrepreneurial thing? And that is when I kind of joined him as a partner. He was been running this for last 15, 16 years, and that is where this change happened. That was middle of the COVID. I had taken a short break to write a book. I wrote a book on public market investing called the Polycycle Investor. So after that, wanted to do try my hand in doing something on my own. So that was an interesting phase. We did a lot of interesting stuff from a large scale bank to a more boutique bank where we did a few startups also. We did some large trades also. We didn't have a merchant banking license, so we advised companies on their IPO path also. So a lot of interesting stuff which we had not done before. But I think most importantly, Harsh, what it did for me, it brought a lot of ownership in the way I started running my transactions, my business. So that entrepreneurial stint in a lot of ways helped me build break walls in rather than build walls, in terms of you stop thinking in terms of this is not my work, that is not my work. Every work which needs to be get done by the franchise is your work.
So that entrepreneurial bug, after working for a decade and a half for different investment banks, going into your own, then the switch happened to Dam Capital Advisors, which is yours, right? You
No,
totally
this is
took
not
the.
mine. So this is owned by Mr. Dharmesh Mehta. He was my skip boss for 10 years in Enam Access.
Oh, I did not know that. I thought you founded a Dam. So okay, awesome. So you went,
Yeah,
but still entrepreneurial. I mean, the position is still very entrepreneurial in terms of the leap
absolutely.
from. Got
The
it,
firm
got it.
itself is very entrepreneurial, Harsh, and the way Dharmesh and a lot of us. So I've worked with Dharmesh for 10 years in my past avatar in Enam Access. So when he wanted to set up a North India practice, he reached out to me and we wanted to, explore this. And so it was an interesting journey. The day one I joined, never felt like I was joining a new organization. And we've had a fairly heady 3 years since I've joined DAM. Done a lot of interesting stuff. And like you said, the role as well as the entrepreneurial mindset of the firm is something which keeps us going.
What would you say is the difference for someone who wants to get into starting their own investment bank versus working for an investment bank? There are a lot of small boutique investment banks which cater to, low ticket size, specialize in certain industries, and they kind of jump into it. Perhaps sometimes not with as much experience that you've had, but still experience. You've seen both sides of the coin. If you had to advise someone, what would you say are the differences between doing this entrepreneurial kind of role versus actually working for a structured investment bank?
So I think I would say it's a industry where you get to earn the trust of the client. So you have to be fairly objective in terms of your own capabilities and what you've demonstrated in the past. So let me bring a perspective. So if you feel that you've been kind of been in a support role all along and you've not independently run a transaction, then probably it's a little early for you to get into a running your own franchise, because client will need that level of confidence, that trust in you, that you can help him end to end, whether it is on the structuring of the transaction, on the pricing, on negotiations, on the legal nuances, on the tax advisory. So he's going to lean on you for every aspect of the transaction, and you should have that conviction, confidence to do it. Secondly, on the other side, flip side, I think everyone should try and do that at least at some point in time in their career. If you have that kind of, I would say, bug to get into an entrepreneur kind of a role, because it teaches you a lot, and it kind of makes you more well-rounded as a professional, as an investment banker. So I think it's a very, very important and part of the journey, because investment banking by definition is entrepreneurial. So I had the privilege of learning from the best in the industry, Mr. Vallabh Bansali. So he used to say, he was the founder of Enam Securities, my first investment banking job. There are only good bankers, there are no good banks. So a bank is as good as the bankers they have, right? So ultimately, the transaction is done by a banker, not by a bank. Bank, the brand can help you land a good transaction, can help you source a good transaction, can help you demonstrate credentials, but at the end of the day, it is the banker who closes the transaction.
I am hiring across South Asia and the Middle East, and when I'm looking at business development managers, executives, I see it as a very entrepreneurial role because they have to be self-driven and sell themselves as well as the company. So you need to have that knack to be able to build trust with whoever you're working with. Sounds very much like investment banking because you're storytelling and you're building trust. Without that, irrespective of how good your product is, people will not give you an opportunity. Am I
Absolutely.
correct to? Yeah.
In fact, what I've realized is I've seen multiple businesses, especially on the services side, which are fairly business development, sales, relationship driven. So from that perspective, whenever you are chasing new business and you're selling a service and not a product, you need to be entrepreneurial. The sales job by definition has to be entrepreneurial. It cannot be a functional job like any other.
Absolutely. And the best analogy I use when I'm talking to, by the way, like exceptional talent, just wakes me up, excites me because you can feel the energy and the vibe, and that's hard to hide. And I like to say that, they're the tip of the spear. So we might have everything perfect, but if the tip is blunt, it won't penetrate. So they need to be
Absolutely.
sharp, and that sharpness I've also come to realize, or I believe, is a mix of nature and nurture. Nature because they're born with that talent; those are the cards that they've been dealt, and then nurture because if they've been dealt those cards, are they playing it right or not? Are they learning from their mistakes? Are they understanding how to build the relationship which drives business? And when you get both of them going together, it's exciting because you see potential and you see what they are capable of, and sometimes even they don't realize it, and you see it and it's kind of exciting. I don't know if that's something you see in investment bankers.
No, no, fantastically articulated, Harsh. I think, like you would have seen in all those Wall Street movies, they say, no, ABC, always be closing. So you need that sharpness to be closing a trade or closing a mandate or closing a business. So that hunger, that incisiveness, and that sharpness, all of that is required to both stitch a trade as well as stitch a mandate. So from that perspective, what you're saying is absolutely on point. And very interesting, you mentioned some of this in terms of what the team is capable of, and I completely agree with you that nurture is as important. And but at the same time, what we I'm realizing is that it's important that people value the opportunities they are getting. A lot of times, I've realized that people think that sitting behind the desk doing a job of analysis and all is a lot more valued than sitting in front of the client, only to realize that as you move along the value chain, as you become more senior in your organization, pretty much every role becomes a sales role or a business development role. So from that
Correct.
perspective, unless you have the intent, desire to meet new people, to learn from them, and to be with the smartest guy in the room, and be able to hold a conversation with the smartest, sharpest people in the room, you will kind of limit your growth.
Absolutely. And investment banking from the start, you do analyst, associate, in some cases, associate director, then you get into the VP. The minute you hit the VP role, you are kind of leaning towards sales now because the MDs will now take you along for calls, you'll start doing meetings. The point is to nurture you or groom you to be the MD at some point in time so that you can go build your own books, right? So it becomes a completely sales role. And in
Absolutely.
investment, of course, I've not been in investment bank. I studied finance, but my understanding, reading books and working 20 years with investment bankers, is that if you don't do the grind initially, you won't be able to do the sale at the end, right? And you need to understand what you're pitching and selling. So the analytical part is as important as the sales part. But yeah, you're right. I mean, if you just want to do sales all the time, you will not succeed in the industry because you need to go out and be able to build that relationship and bring them in and trust you because you're also competing against others who want the same, right? They want the same clients, they want to do the same deals. The competition is fierce, especially in in the investment banking. Am I correct? Am I painting the right
Absolutely,
picture?
absolutely. Yes. In fact, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's on the AI side of stuff. So he made a very interesting point to me, that he told me, Aditya, gradually what you will realize is that most of the internship and training jobs that people will get, the youngsters would get, will be nepo jobs, because the entry level jobs, a lot of those entry level jobs will be taken up by technology, will be taken up by AI. So the entire process of going through the grind and getting your hands dirty early on, that may just not happen. You might just want people for client interaction at some point of time, but then you'll have to make sure that your learning curve is that much faster. So it's extremely important that people who are in the industry right now, who are being given this opportunity to evolve at their own pace over the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, latch on to it, because the next batch is going to eat your breakfast and lunch and dinner if you don't do that, because they will not probably have to spend as much time making the decks, the financial model. Obviously, they will still have to build business understanding, but they will
Yeah,
be ready to go to client much faster than you guys are going to get ready for.
absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned your book, the Polycycle Investor, and I mean, I've read The Intelligent Investor. You also have a controversial view that you shouldn't buy and hold like Buffett has, and the behavioral aspect of investing is a given. I mean, that's what Buffett also speaks about. You have to have the temperament to be able to be in there when the market crashes, or double down when you know you're at the bottom of the cycle. And you have a very Indian centric view to it, because you're right, most of the books are very US driven, US markets driven. With everything that's going on right now, um, are you investing cyclically based on what you've written? Do you see this as a huge opportunity to double down and actually make money?
Absolutely.
Because yeah.
Absolutely. So if I look at it, I think in the last 2 to 2.5 years, this is the first time I'm finding market to be investable. Right. So whatever cash is there and all, I'm looking to incrementally deploy in the market, and that is important. If you're not going to invest when market is providing you bargains, then it will be very tough. And we've got into a situation where the country's got into an equity culture, right? So these opportunities will become fewer and farther in between. Even if you look at, COVID time, the SIP cash flow inflow per month used to be 3.5, 4,000 crores. Now it is 25,000 crores. So it's become 6x in the last 5 years or so, while your investable pool of capital is not so much. So while a lot of companies are coming to market for an IPO and fundraise, but honestly, not all of these companies are actually investable companies. So to that extent, your avenues to invest is shrinking in terms of equities, but your capital flow, capital chasing equities is increasing dramatically. So these kind of opportunities where you get fair pricing or slightly better than fair pricing will be fewer and farther in between in Indian markets. India is going to become net provider of capital to the world rather than being a recipient of capital to the world over the next decade or so, and you will see that happening. So if you look at the stake of FIIs in in Indian capital market has come down to 16-17%, which used to be close to 30% less than a decade ago, or maybe 6-7 years ago pre-COVID. Right. So to that extent, we are seeing that while the foreign capital is going away, Indian capital is buying. At the same time, your markets are continuing to be strong, buoyant, and increasing. Forget the last couple of months of war and tariff and everything. But even if you
Mm.
look at from a point to point, from a COVID low to today, at COVID Nifty was about 7,500. Now we are at 22,000. So we are 3x of COVID low even today. So we are not technically in a huge recession that ways in terms of pricing. So it's not that stocks are available at COVID level pricing at this point of time or anywhere close to that.
So the depreciation of the rupee, the ability to invest outside India now, given Gift City and the laws which have come in, do you see India turning into more of a manufacturing hub? With AI also coming in, there's going to be a big hit in terms of, the Infosys and the inflow from India, that India used to generate from forex. I mean, it's literally a change in everything that's happened in India in the last couple of decades, right? The India story of providing IT services, BPOs, etc.
So I would think India is a very, very entrepreneurial country, right? You rightly, I'm glad you mentioned BPO. So when BPO happened, people thought that people will lose jobs right, left, and center. And after the BPO became more agentic and tech driven, and your CXM platforms became moved from call center driven to a more platform driven CXM customer experience models, right? So from that perspective, a lot of people thought a lot of jobs will go, but then IT came in. IT took up a huge number of jobs. Now again, people are saying that AI will lead to a lot of loss of jobs, but we are a bunch of learners here. We will learn. I think someone will be required to implement those AI tools also into corporate systems like us. And again, Indian students, Indian tech bent, the kind of education platform, the breadth of education that we have, the kind of vocational training platforms that we have, the kind of digital platforms now that we have. So from that perspective, ability to learn, upskill, and be relevant will not be very, very tough for Indian students who are willing to put their heart to it. But yes, lot of jobs which are more mundane will go away. So upskilling will become extremely important and a very important challenge for us. But it will become upskilling will also become very cheap for someone who's willing to spend time, energy, and has the willingness to learn. So upskilling is not going to be as expensive that you need a new degree or something, right? कि पहले अपने पहले I was doing mechanical engineer, now I need to do computer engineering, so it's a 4 year investment of your time. Now upskilling will be more vocational. You will need a 6 month course, a 3 month course, or some training at some online platform, some vocational course. So you'll find a lot more training modules which will be a lot more efficient both in terms of pricing as well as time involved to upskill yourself.
Yeah, I was telling my wife that this going to an IIM, IIT, or going to Harvard and taking up a crazy loan to then pay off for the next, it makes no sense, because even those guys are now struggling to get jobs. If you want to learn anything, the information is free. Yes, you could find it. There's a lot of high quality information, but you got to look for it. And if you're keen, you can learn anything. So the entrepreneur in you and the whole lifetime employment bit is gone. I mean, I think it ended at least a decade or so ago. You got to be entrepreneurial even in your workplace. I mean, you got to show value, right? Or what I like to call entrepreneur. Even if you're working with someone else, you're still very entrepreneurial in how you access.
Absolutely.
Uh, what advice do you give your kids? Because we've been brought up to believe that education is a must. Like, you need a degree. It's kind of like it's easier to sift out who to consider just based on that, right?
No, I
Um,
think honestly, from that perspective, from a screening perspective, from a employability perspective, your degrees might still continue to be relevant because it becomes a very easy way to screen. So if I'm looking at someone with a specific level of talent, intellect, or uh, initiative, it becomes that much easier for me to go and hire someone from IIT or an IIM, because I know that they will bring a certain level of competency, at least in terms of ability, right?
mhm.
Versus spending a lot of time, energy, and trying to find the right guy. People are smart these days; they can bluff their way through interviews, and then you spend time training and everything. So it's a lot of work. So I think from that perspective, from a screening perspective and early stage job perspective, your degrees will continue to hold value. But you're right, but in terms of your work itself, in terms of what you learn in these colleges and all, that you will have to be a lot more entrepreneurial for your own self. You'll have to be honest in terms of what your drawbacks are. Suppose I know that I suck at AI. I'll have to find a course for myself for AI to at least make sense and make better use of my time. Otherwise, someone who's 20 years younger to me, 15 years younger to me, will come and do my job more efficiently. Now, there is no your ego will not save you, your number of years of experience will not save you, because someone who has better access to skills will have better access to skills. So earlier, when we started off our career, the relationships, corporate relationships were even more important, because just finding a phone number of someone who used to be a huge task. Now there are so many databases, so many online platforms, that reaching out to anyone, even if you don't know them, is not very, very difficult. If they don't
Mm.
respond or something, is a separate angle. But even if you tomorrow want to reach chairman of Tata Sons, you can at least find his email address and write an email to him. He doesn't
Mhm.
find your email worthwhile, that is a separate question.
Mhm.
Earlier, even that used to be a challenge. If I want to reach a CFO of a particular company, or a company heard from someone is looking to do an IPO, how do I get access? So there, your network used to be very important. But I think all that importance is going away very, very quickly.
Talking about network, I mean, isn't the power of these institutions really the network? Because that's where, I don't remember anything I studied in business school, but it's the friendships and the relationships that have
Absolutely.
remained.
Absolutely, Harsh. I think that is extremely important, and that continues to open doors 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line. I know people who've taken very, very long entrepreneurial stint, did not do very well, but because they had that kind of a network, they managed to get back onto the job, or get really interesting profiles and jobs, because they had that kind of a network, they had those kind of friendships, and people knew that forget what has happened over with him for the last 3, 4, 5 years. But generally, the guy is good, capable, and can deliver value to the firm. So they've gotten hired and got at a fairly senior level straight away. So those things can happen only if you have a network.
You did the IndiaMART IPO in 2019.
Absolutely.
At that point, it was the biggest B2B marketplace going public, a huge success. What is the biggest challenge that you faced for that particular transaction, especially when you were trying to tell a story for something which was that new?
So one, it was more like a yellow pages. It was not so much of a marketplace. They had tried a marketplace which did not really work out so well, but it was
Mhm.
more a yellow pages kind of a thing, where the categorization was there. So some of the challenges, like you rightly mentioned, was that there was no like-to-like comparison, right? There was a Just Dial which was listed, which was a more phone-based yellow pages, and then there was this IndiaMART which was coming in, and which was more digital. And at that point of time, in terms of accounting profits, they were actually in losses, and it has been a while. They've been running for a decade and a half, so people were not very convinced that something which is not turned profitable in 10, 12 years will turn immediately after the IPO. But since then, it has been a cash generating machine, fantastic company, fantastic set of promoters. And the way they've created this platform, evolved this platform, the way they have married digital, which is your feet on the street, with the digital platform and the back end call center, is phenomenal.
You've done 35 major transactions like these. Is there any one which stands out?
So there are a lot of them, Harsh. We did a transaction, M&A transaction for Rico Auto, where we sold. There was a joint venture between Rico Auto of India and FCC of Japan, where we helped Rico sell their stake to FCC Japan. So from a 50-50 JV, Rico exited it. So working with Japanese, that was an interesting education. While they were very interested, but they were so thorough, and so they will take so much time, and every meeting had to be happen physically in person. So from that perspective, while they were super interested in doing the trade, it still took us about 1.5, 2 years to close the trade. So very, very interesting transaction. We recently did a hospital transaction for Policy Bazaar. We helped them acquire a hospital, a new hospital, which incidentally the sell side banker was my ex partner, Mr. Rajiv Mangla from IVA. So he was the sell side banker, I was the buy side banker. So we stitched that trade. So that was a great fun working with friends, and great company again, Policy Bazaar. What they're trying to do on the healthcare side is phenomenal. They're trying to remove that mistrust which is there between the patient, doctor, the insurer, and the TPA, and create an integrated platform. So I think that is a very, very interesting piece, and very happy to play a small part in trying to scale that up. I think if something like that happens, it will revolutionize healthcare in the country.
You mentioned the Japanese only like to do physical in person. Why is that?
So they are very, old school in some ways. If you see their notes, they will have hundreds of flags. They would want to see your expression. They're very, very protocol conscious. So they are not very happy discussing the nuances of a trade on an email, or that time VCs did not used to be very, very commonplace, but they were not very happy doing detailed negotiations or discussions on clause on phones or on emails. They preferred that we will do it in person. So whenever then they will come next, a month down the line, 2 months down the line, till then almost for us we felt that everything got stalled. But they did a lot of homework on the background. Yeah, so it was quite an education the way they came prepared for every meeting.
And what would happen if you didn't have an answer? Would that go against you, or would you just say, I will get back and be thorough about how you responded?
Well, I think you have to be both honest as well as think on your feet. So there's no right or wrong answer to your question. If you don't know something, I mean, you cannot bluff your way through. But obviously, you will say that I'll check and get back. But usually, if you're working on a transaction, most things you are on top of. And if there is something, you'll have the papers with you in the computer itself. So you might take 5 minutes longer than what Japanese would do because they are more organized, but you'll find your data point. That's all right.
Can you tell me about the Coal India IPO in 2010? That was one of the largest fundraisers in India's history. And how
Yeah.
does an IPO like that differ from, say, a mid-market IPO?
So honestly, Coal India IPO was a very institutional IPO. At that point of time, the power deficit story in India was playing very, very well. Right. So it was a relatively easy sell. The pricing, it was obviously Government of India driven transaction. The chairman that point of time was fairly dynamic, and every investor we went to understood the story in terms of that India needs thermal coal to fire its power plants. So to be honest, it was not a very, very difficult sell. But what it did for us is it made selling the power IPOs much, much more. So we were doing a few power sector IPOs at that point of time. They became unsellable because of Coal India IPO. Because the chairman went and said that, all these power linkages that are being talked about, we are not manufacturing enough coal to supply to everyone. So people realize that the power plants might not get as much coal as they are saying that they have tied up with Coal India. So that was an interesting one, a large one, opened a completely new sector for the country. And I think that ways you have to give it to the government. They've done very, very well to ensure that some of these resource heavy companies, some of these companies which are of national importance, but people did not have sight of, they went public. So that what that did is that it kind of brought a lot of transparency into their operations. People knew what they were doing. It made the senior management in those organizations also more accountable, not only to their respective secretaries and government folks, but also to the public at large.
When you're packaging a company for an IPO, what's the one thing that investors consistently look for that founders tend to overlook?
Yeah. So you're right. So I think depending upon, there are certain companies which get sold on the quality of business, and then there are others who are sold on the back of the promoters which are backing. So I think we've done both. We've sold companies where people have backed the promoter, loved the promoter, and that's why they wanted to be a part of it. And we've seen companies where the business itself was so good that everyone wanted a piece of it. So there are both kind of stories which sell in the market. Either you get a great business which anyone can run, where even if promoters are not involved so much, then also the business will keep running and chugging and throwing cash. Or you get a business where the promoters are fantastic and you know that they are going to make it really big.
Is there any golden rule in negotiation? Because you're part of so many. Who wins? Is it the smartest person in the room? Is it the best listener?
I think a good deal is where everyone wins. That is how I look at it. One has to be more solution oriented. I One is the commercial aspect, right? So the commercial aspects typically get closed relatively early on in the transaction, and that is honestly not the space. While you might think that the pricing and the valuation is the most important thing, but most of the fights happen after that, with respect to who's going to give what indemnity, what is the liability the outgoing owner will have, what is the liability which the incoming investor will have. So one has to be more cognizant in terms of what is fair, rather than always trying to optimize solution for your client. I think the best bankers actually work in a more constructive way to make sure that the risk allocation and the liability is proportionate to the role and job of the each partner. So, like for this one, the hospital transaction where we did, right? So the doctors continue to be partners in that particular transaction. It's not 100% safe. So it was very, very interesting in term, and they continue to run the hospital also. So from a liability, risk, ownership, we allocated everything so in a such a transparent manner, so that whoever is taking what risk is rewarded for that risk, and someone who's not controlling X is not penalized for something which he is not controlling. So I think that is the way to look at it. We should not always look at winning against the counterparty, but trying to find a constructive solution.
And in a given point in time, you're usually working on multiple deals simultaneously. How do you maintain clarity and avoid deal fatigue?
So I think I know it can be tough at times, and I think that's a good problem as a banker to have. I say it's always
Good to
more
have
difficult
less.
as a banker to not have work than to have too much work. So
Mm.
from that perspective, it's important that when you're running multiple transactions, you identify deal leaders within your teams and give them roles, responsibilities, and ownership commensurate to their experience and capability. You cannot completely say that I'll trust my team with everything when he's suppose some a team member of mine has not done a particular work, or in your assessment he does is not capable of handling a particular work. You say that you handle it yourself and leave it. You cannot do that, because obviously client's trust is also important, and client has paid for senior level resources. So you have to know what you can allocate. So I think delegation and constructive delegation is extremely important.
For a young associate aiming to be in your position one day, what's the one skill they should focus on mastering now, given that AI has come and is disrupting everything? It's made it easier for everyone to look smarter, increase benchmarks. Like, how would you recommend they think about this industry?
So there are two, three things. One is that absolutely, like you rightly said, technology is going to be a differentiator. So make sure that in terms of your tech capabilities, you are absolutely cutting edge, because that is what is going to free up your time for rest of the stuff. Secondly, value the role that you have got. It is not very, very easy to get. There are a lot of people who will give their limb and a half to be in your shoes. So make sure that you value the opportunity that you've got. Third, be patient. And fourth, a very interesting thing which one of my professors used to say is that to learn anything, there are only two ways. One is to meet smart people and read smart books. There is no third way to learn. So the third way now these days is obviously the internet and YouTube. But broadly, if you get the drift of what I am saying, that only way to learn is wanting to be with people and making an effort by watching constructive videos rather than whiling your time doing doom scrolling. Make sure that, unfortunately, one thing which used to be a very, very hygiene factor when we were younger, I see a lot of youngsters associates don't read newspapers. Please read newspapers, at least one business daily and one normal daily, because that is one thing which is not an echo chamber. Everything else you read, right, whether it's on your social media, your in shorts, your YouTube, all feeds are kind of designed to give you more of what you like to read. But to make your reading and your knowledge base more broad based, it's important that you read newspapers, you read different kind of books, meet people in streams not very, very aligned to your business, so that be curious, be ask a lot of questions. So that is how that is the only way to learn.
Which newspapers do you read daily?
So I read Times of India, I read Economic Times. These two I read on a regular basis, and then sometimes I pick up a Business Standard as well.
And most recent books you read?
So this is the one which I'm reading right now. How countries go broke by Ray Dalio. Right. There is another one which. So that is the one which I'm reading right now. And
Is it making sense? Because a lot of his that book is actually very doomsday kind of inclined, but he also talks about cycles like your book does, right? And
yeah.
it has to come and go. Do you see truth in whatever you read so far?
Yes and no. So while one big challenge I'm facing with that book is it's written on 10 font size, so it's difficult to read beyond 20-30 pages in one go. So that is one
Yeah.
big challenge I'm facing. But yes and no. I think, but it is extremely important to get your thoughts rolling because we are living in an environment where a lot of the biggest countries have taken their deficit financing to a very, very different level. And at some point of time, a lot of these conflicts that we are seeing globally right now is driven by these deficit financing and trying to save the currency and the current way of international trade, right? So, from that perspective, to assess when things can break, to assess what could be implication and what could the new order be, that will be extremely important.
I agree. All right. How do you define success both personally and professionally? Do you feel like you've succeeded already?
So I don't look at it. I think life is a journey. One should enjoy that journey. One should give your best. At the same time, there is no success or failure in absolute sense, right? There was a Urdu couplet which said that तेरा जिंदगी एक ऐसा सफर हो मंजिल पे पहुंचे तो मंजिल हटा दिया. So मतलब you might have wanted to be at an X place 5 years ago. Once you reach that, that is not the end goal. You have to push the boundary further and see what more you can achieve. So what we say that you always should come with day one mentality and not one day mentality. So day one
I,
mentality is that today everything which was given, which I've achieved so far, was given to me on a platter. Today is day one. Today is the day I start work. How can I build on that? And there is one day mentality that one day I will do something which is great. So I think one should get into day one mentality rather than one day mentality.
Yeah, I have this reminder on my calendar. It goes off at around 6 p.m., which basically says, "Did you give it your all today? If you did, then nothing else matters, right?" And then I try to unwind after that because the mind is constantly going, and just to switch off and feel like you made some progress. I try to live by that day one
Absolutely.
mentality.
I think, Harsh, that is the best you can do, right? So there was a very, very interesting uh, mathematical equation which said 1.01 to the power 365 is 35 point something. So if you
Mhm.
improve 1% every day for a year, you are 35 times as better as what you were when you started the year. So that is the power of compounding. I know you cannot improve 1% every day, but even whatever fraction you can improve, as long as your trajectory is moving ahead, uh, the goal should be that 5 years down the line, you should feel that 5 years old Harsh or 5 years old Aditya was not as smart as I am today. So that should be the goal.
Have you read Arnold Schwarzenegger's book?
I have not.
I
Should I?
recommend. Yeah, I would highly recommend it. It's quite inspiring. But one of the key messages that he talks about, two actually, which uh, reminds me of our conversation today, is one is always be selling. Like no matter what you do, you are selling. And number two is this whole philosophy of never stopping. Like you might climb one mountain, but then you look at the next peak and you can never stop, right? Like life is a journey, and you need those peaks to keep on going. The day you stop working, you stop. I mean, life kind of ends. And this whole idea of just put one feet in front of the other, keep moving, and you won't even realize how far you've come unless you do that.
Absolutely.
So love it. So health, wealth, relationship, and purpose, how would you prioritize them?
So I think now I am 45 plus Harsh. So once you get to this age, one does need to prioritize health, right? So there are different stages of life where you need to prioritize different things. I think in 20s and 20s you should prioritize your learning and making sure that You're giving it all in your business, in your work, whatever you are doing, and continue to think about it. In 30s, you start prioritizing your relationships a lot because you get married, you have kids, you have a young family, you need to support them in more ways than financial. And then by the time you reach my age, your kids have slightly grown up, and then but you've also grown up in the process, right? So you have to make sure that you prioritize your health. So at different stages of life, one needs to do different things. There is no right or wrong answer to it, but that does not mean that you can compromise on your health at any point of time. So you might not necessarily go to gym every day, but find at least half an hour, 45 minutes, 1 hour in your day to do something, whether it's a yoga, a brisk walk, a quick run. But find one needs to find time every day to do something.
Yeah, so I'm turning 43 this year. I just had my first child, my daughter. So I'm taking her to the gym with me just to see that, okay, you need to bake this. It's fun. You got to bake health into your day to day life. And today morning, I grabbed her and I was kind of doing jump squats, and she was laughing because she's just like 4 months old. but, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think if you were uh, again, an analogy which comes to mind is, if you cannot swim, you can't really save anyone else. So you got to look after yourself before you're able to look after your immediate circle, your community, your country, or work as well. So I think health is an.
Absolutely. Like जैसे in the aeroplane, right? दूसरों को की सहायता करने से पहले अपना मास्क लगाएं, right? So first is to save yourself, make sure that you are fit, prime, and it helps in your work also. It's not that I mean the benefits of a good healthy life is all pervasive, right? There is
Absolutely.
nothing which does not help your a good health enjoy allows you to enjoy relationships more. It allows you to find that extra 1 hour to go and spend time with your friends. It allows you to want to travel more, do a little bit more adventurous traveling if you want to go for a trek, or you want to do something slightly more adventurous. So unless you have your health on your side, it becomes a little tough.
Last few questions, quick fire, Aditya. If you weren't a deal maker, what profession would you pursue?
So I think I would love to be on the other side of the table also, which is get into more investing and evaluating, because that is something which I do for my personal money and something which I enjoy quite a bit. So that is one piece which I can think of. Secondly, I don't know whether I'll make a good teacher or not, but at some point of time, would want to take up teaching and share some bit of whatever I have learned whenever I decide to stop being a banker. This is something I would like to do at some point of time in my life.
Is there any personal professional goal you haven't achieved yet?
So, like I said, yeah, I'm very that way. You might think it's counterintuitive for a banker, but fairly easygoing that way. Is I take things one day at a time, given my best. Try to do more every day. Don't set too many goals from a career objective perspective at this point of time. To be honest.
If there's one skill you could master overnight, what would it be?
So at this point of time, it has to be AI. I think this is something which I would want to uh, get my hands dirty in. I think it can make me a lot more efficient. Right now, like a lot of my peers, I'm using AI pretty much as a Google to ask questions to Chat GPT and all. But I think there's a lot more which can be done with AI. So looking to get my hands dirty there and build my understanding there. Another skill which I think is lot more public speaking. So would want to get into platforms where if I want to be a teacher at some point of time, I think I'll have to become a much better and a more engaging speaker. So that is another thing which I'm trying to work on.
Last question. Any one habit or routine that's been the biggest difference or made the biggest difference in your success?
So one is I think habit or attitude, which I think is I take my life relatively lightly. I don't take myself very seriously. So I think that has made a lot of the stress around a typical investment banking job kind of go away. And in terms of attitude, making sure that I always think of my client as my boss. So the way I want to keep my boss happy, I want to keep my client happy, because ultimately, while my theoretically my salary is coming from my boss, but effectively, if the client is not paying it, it is not coming to you, right? So your client is your skip boss. He's your boss's boss in a way.
Aditya, this was fun. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Thank you for spending the time and sharing your life and wisdom. I'll
Thanks for
pause
having
this.
me, Harsh. It was a fantastic. You're a fantastic conversationalist. I had a great time speaking with you. Yeah.